Perfect.
Sweet.
We're up. Do you have a fun topic? Otherwise, I thought we could do picks and plugs first. That worked out well when we did the inverted episode.
Ooh, I don't. I have like the opposite of a fun topic. Work is kicking my butt right now,
Oh
but
yeah, let's talk about it. Or
Redux,
what you
man.
can talk about.
Redux is so
Is
hard to trace. Like it's
really?
very difficult to
I thought that
understand
was the
like
point.
the point of
Well, like Redux, just better state management, and that you had like a. So let me caveat this. I've never used Redux. I've used Vuex, which is crazy
Mhm.
because I don't have a lot of experience with Vue, but that's like Vue's
Yeah.
Redux experience. And one of the things that I did like about it was that you had like a history and a time machine. And you could go back and say, like, when the state was this, what did all the components look like?
Yeah, that might work when there's like a couple components and a few Redux states. But when there's like a gazillion and you're trying to trace through the code to figure out which
Fair
reducer
enough.
called which thunk
Mhm.
and how did it get dispatched and from where, um, it gets really, really hard to trace everything through.
Have you looked at XState?
I've never done anything with XState, but I'm also not going to be able to convince Stripe to make any changes.
Well, I didn't expect you to, because I know Stripe's big and that would be like, let's burn the boats.
Yeah.
But I just wondered like what the comparisons were. If you were evaluating those two tools, what are the similarities and differences?
I think so. Conceptually, in my head, what I think XState does is that Redux can go from any state to any other state, essentially, right? So your the actions that you dispatch, there's no restrictions essentially on how you can mutate the state. Whereas XState, I think it's like
Hmm,
actions with restrictions. Give it, you can only perform this action on these states. That's what makes it like a stateful thing.
I gotcha. I
But
am.
I get it. Like the idea of Redux is to like untie your state from your front end framework.
Mhm.
Especially this is especially useful in Stripe when everything is running in secure iframes and they all need to kind of like hold a common state outside of the context of these segregated React apps, essentially. Um, so it makes sense to have like a third party state management system sit outside of the iframes that everybody can communicate with.
Yeah.
It's just a lot. And I'm like, anytime I'm trying to make changes, I'm like, which reducer was this? And how do I know? Like, I don't actually know how thunks are called from reducers. I need to like actually just go watch a tutorial or something.
Mm.
I know what a thunk is, but like I have yet to find in the Stripe code like where a thunk gets called,
Mm.
essentially.
Interesting. Well, I remember, I don't know if you were on this episode or not, where we had Jacob talking about stylytics.
No,
I
I was
think that's
not.
right. Let me see if I can find the episode really quick. But he was so stylytics. It's a svelte tech stack,
Mm,
and one of the things, yeah, I think, yeah, this is it. It's episode 99. One of the things that he was talking about was they have a bunch of different iframes that talk to each other. But like they're on it's I don't know. Stripe, I guess you could send off to a one of your URLs so that you're protecting all of the code. Like you can guarantee security, I guess. But like in his case, I guess it's a little bit different. You're embedding your widget on somebody else's site. So like the application usage, like I think Stitch Fix is a great example of what Stylytics does. Like you see this outfit you like and it pulls in a bunch of other products and says that like these all work together with what you've selected, and then you can
gotcha.
click on the shoes and it'll tell you information about the shoes. So they've been able to increase all these purchases like on Walmart. I mean, they have a great, and like Nike, they have all these crazy clients But like that's kind of the use case. But I interviewed there like a long time ago, and it was kind of interesting because they were talking about like you have to know what you can and can't do within the browser and what iframes will and won't let you do, which some of it felt like, oh goodness, we stepped back into the 1900s in the internet days.
Yeah, and you have to be very locked down about,
Mhm.
what happens on these iframes too. Like your
Yeah.
origin list, your allow list essentially is very, very important when it comes to that kind of stuff, where you can load scripts and images from any resources at all.
Yeah. It was kind of interesting. Anyways, fun times. Well, we can get
Yeah.
started.
Yeah,
This is
yeah.
fun seeing people in the chat. If this is your first time joining us, we are recording an episode live. So I don't know if there's anybody here from the Midwest in the United States, but they have the longest goodbyes. Is that a Texas thing?
Um, yeah, less so.
Okay.
Not as bad as Midwest, I would
So
say.
in the Midwest, it's kind of an ongoing joke. You say like, "Oh, I'm gonna go say goodbye," and then like, "Hey, we need to leave," and then it takes you an hour to leave. Um, so just because you go around and say goodbye to everybody, you start to say goodbye, and then you get pulled into another conversation. So it's like the longest goodbye. So I like to think of our show as the longest hello and the longest goodbye, because you are getting the pre-show right now, and we'll do the intro, and then at the end we'll say goodbye to the show. Goodbye to you guys. So I'm gonna pull up the let's see the song, the intro music. I just have to find it. It's like there we go. So we're in Brad and I are in StreamYard, and they give you all kinds of things like rock music. So I just have to dig for the compressed. Okay, I got it. We're ready. Okay. Welcome to another episode of Compressed FM, a podcast all about web design and development with a little bit of zest. In today's episode, we have the JavaScript cage match. I would like to add a JavaScript death cage match, but hopefully we'll both come out alive after this. So without further ado,
Web development and design, who would have guessed? Well, we can do them both, even add a little zest. So turn up the volume, get ready for the best. Let's get it started in this episode of Compress.
hello, my name is Amy Dutton, and I am a lead maintainer on the Redwood JS core team.
Hey y'all, my name is Brad Garapi and I'm a senior front-end developer at Stripe.
Awesome. So I was at Momentum Conference in Cincinnati last week and gave a talk called the JavaScript Cage Match. And I think my favorite part of the talk was we all got in a room and I jokingly said, okay, everybody pick your corner and lock the doors. Have a cage
That's
match.
awesome.
Little did they know. But basically, I walked through 6 different frameworks. I walked through Svelte, Astro, Next Pages, Next App, Redwood, Remix, and that's it. So mostly React frameworks. Astro's kind of on the fringes because it could be a React framework. It could not, depending on what front end you bring to the table. And then Svelte's kind of an outlier. But comparing and contrasting all of those things. So it was a good time. We'll talk about each of those frameworks and kind of what they bring to the table and kind of go from there.
Yeah. Before we jump into all the different frameworks, talk about the Momentum conference in general. I think the organizer's name is, why do I want to say Michael? I think I met him at
Because
that
it is
conference.
Michael.
Yes.
Michael Richardson. He is amazing. I will stick a link to his Twitter profile in the chat. It was a great conference. I think what surprised me is that this conference, man, there's a bunch of Michael Richardsons.
Yeah.
I'll find it included in the show notes. But Cincinnati is a tech hub, but like a different kind of tech hub.
Oh, weird.
In the sense of Kroger is based out of Cincinnati.
Yes.
I think Fifth Third is the bank is based out of Cincinnati. They were also a major sponsor. So you have these companies that might not necessarily think of tech as tech companies, but technology does play a huge role in the company, and they are based out of Cincinnati. So the sponsors were not like the typical indie Twitter,
Right.
like for sale, Cloudinary, you know, all these other ones that you typically see. It was like big corporations.
Yeah, it's
And
funny. There's like bubbles that are tech for tech, like
yep,
hosting companies and dev
that's
tools
right.
companies. And then there's like tech in industry, which is just like literally everything else.
That's right. And they were all there, and I'm assuming they were there more for like recruiting purposes to be like,
Yeah.
hey, come work here.
Yeah. Cool.
And this conference was a little bit different in two ways. One, I went not with somebody, like, but I've done enough conferences that I went and there were friends there, which is like such a great feeling. So,
Yeah.
our good friend Taylor Dussin was there, which we've talked about multiple
Sweet.
times. He actually lives here in Nashville. I'm from Nashville, but we've never hung out together in Nashville. We just see each other in different cities or at the airport. Um, and then Alex, oh, what is his last name? He lives in Atlanta, and he's been to that conference. Have you met him? He has blue hair.
Not that I can think of. Although I don't know how somebody like that wouldn't stand out with the blue hair.
I think we may have even gone. I can't remember if we went to one of his talks together. Oh yeah, there he is. I'll include a link to his profile. There we go. He is a Vue developer, so I didn't talk about Vue in a particular talk that I gave, but he is really big on CSS. So I think all the talks that I've heard him give, he talks about CSS.
Okay. Yep. I remember the talk now. Yep.
Yeah. Which was cool. One thing that Momentum did that I've never experienced when I've gone to a conference, which I really appreciate, was they had a speaker feedback system.
Mm,
And so you could opt into it. You didn't have to receive feedback, but they only asked if you are going to opt in to get feedback. We asked that you attend at least 2 sessions and provide feedback to those 2 sessions.
cool.
So I attended Alex and gave feedback to him just because I wanted to be there to support him. So that was easy. And then I attended a tech leadership talk, which I really appreciated. The guy that gave the talk, he focused not only on the tech track leadership, but also people leadership.
Mm,
Because there are basically 2 tracks as you become more senior, and it's
yeah.
important to recognize both.
Yeah. I think the people leadership aspect of that is definitely the tougher of the two.
Well, my dad, when I got into management at Zeal, he was like, the dirty secret of management is that it's really an HR job, which is you're doing a lot of managing people's emotions, not just
Yep.
their work. But anyways, I enjoy helping a group rally around a particular thing or a particular project. So it was good. But so what I wanted to say about Alex's talk was he was talking about the latest and greatest features in CSS. And a lot of them I'd already heard about, but there were still things that I learned in his talk. So I appreciated that he kind of had something for everyone. And some of the stuff, this is the only thing about being in tech for so long, is I can get away with a lot of my previous knowledge with CSS, but there's so
Yeah.
much stuff that's been added lately. In fact, I think he said there's like 500 properties that have been added within the last 2 or 3 years.
It's
And so
hard
you can do
because like
things more efficiently. Sorry.
yeah, you don't know until you run across a use case. Like the first
Mhm.
time I used has,
Mhm.
I was just like, whatever. I'm writing some CSS. I'm like, this seems difficult. And then I took a step back and I was like, oh my gosh, this is what has is for. And
Mhm.
all of a sudden, this really complex selector that probably wouldn't work in some use cases just melts away to this
Yeah.
nice, easy little has statement.
Yeah. So my favorite takeaway, the thing that I did not know that I learned is that he made the point CSS is a typed language, which I didn't really
Yep.
think about, but you can't put, say, like if you have color, you can't give it a pixel value and say it's 50
Hmm.
pixels. Or if you have width, you can't give it a hexadecimal value. That's not going to work. So if you create a custom property, so what that looks like is basically a variable within CSS, you can actually define those types so
Hmm.
that when you're working within like the browser and looking at those things, it will prompt you and tell you like, no, that's an invalid input, which I had no idea you could do. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, Adam Argel loves to like flex on that, like the number of units that are in CSS and that
Yeah.
it's actually typed. Now, what we need is like a really cool, like, and I don't think this exists, but like a type linter for CSS where it's like,
Mm.
yo, you're not putting the right thing in here.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and I should have asked Alex. We need to have him on the podcast. But just like, what are things that you still feel like CSS is missing? Because I'm like, you can almost do everything. Masonry, I
We
think
got
is maybe
masonry and we
it's
got
okay.
the parent selector, which
Uh-huh.
like that's pretty much it.
Container queries are pretty awesome.
Uh-huh.
Like, I'm not sure that there's anything I really like. I need this.
And I don't feel like I also don't design like the most craziest websites. It's like I just don't feel like I'm reaching for a lot of these advanced features, and I'm just like, this is great. One day I might need them, but today
Yeah.
is just not really. Tailwind and all the utility classes pretty much suffice for me at this point.
Yeah. I don't think I've designed some crazy stuff and built it. But there's not too much. I feel like more of the innovation stuff happens on the design side,
Yeah.
that you're plugging in. I've never, at least recently, I haven't designed stuff, but also I know enough code that I know what I can and can't design. So I don't know. Maybe it's not an issue, but yeah, I'm happy with the state of things.
So
Uh,
let's transition into your
yep.
talk. Before we get into every single framework, how do you think it went? How was the reception?
So it's a lot of ground to cover.
Yeah.
I
How
just
long did you
walked
have?
away. I had 50 minutes and I'm
Okay.
giving the same talk at Connect Tech next month in Atlanta. So I'm really looking forward to like being able to tighten things up a little bit. It's a lot of content when you're talking about 6 different frameworks. And so the good thing about having a friend in the room, because Alex did come to the talk, is it was like, be honest with me. You're not going to hurt my feelings. Just tell me like what can be better. Because there were moments where I felt like Next can do this, Next app can do this, Next or Redwood does this, Astro looks like this. And it just felt like so much material to get through,
Mm-hmm.
where I felt the better parts were parts where I had stories where I'm like, this is the use case that I had
Yeah.
for this. And let's talk about how this applies to your code or when you might reach for this particular tool.
Yeah.
Towards the end of the talk, I did have a few charts where I just like kind of laid out, here's what you get with each one. And I can talk about that a little bit too, but those felt a little bit more, I don't know, easier to talk about, easier to follow. I just wasn't sure how many people in the room followed all the examples. It was just
Yeah.
it was a lot of content.
It's
So
like
just trying to make it more cohesive.
you almost need to set the baseline of like, yeah, this is what they all do the same. Let's talk about what
Mhm.
makes them interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you might reach for one over the other.
Yeah.
And, I work on Redwood full time. So, and I made that very clear at the beginning and I kind of pitched Redwood and I was like, okay, I don't want this to be a commercial for Redwood. I mean, that's not why you guys came to the talk. Let's talk about all these other things and why you might reach for them. And there are instances where I prefer to reach for Astro or I prefer to reach for, Remix. Like the compressed website, for example, is built on Remix. Like why do that? What are the things that it offers in those contexts that make more sense? And I think, that's really been my exploration has really been twofold. It's been one, I think rising tide lifts all boats. So what can Redwood specifically learn from these other frameworks, but also have more tools in your tool chest so you're not always reaching for a hammer when you need a screwdriver. Like, let's figure out what's the best tool for the job.
Yeah. All right, well let's get into it. I mean,
Let's
I
get
can't
into
wait to
it.
hear. Baseline for me, I've got React experience, Remix experience, some Svelte experience, some Astro experience as well. What else have we got? Oh, Next, but not the app router, just the pages router.
Mhm.
What am I missing?
You haven't done
Oh,
Redwood,
Redwood.
right?
I think I did like a starter and like that's about it.
Okay. And this is interesting too. So maybe let's just start here when you talk about baselines and what all the frameworks do.
Yeah.
Um, there's been a talk, I guess that was maybe around April and May online where everybody was like, we want the Laravel framework for JavaScript. And like we recorded episodes on those things. And, the conversation was just fascinating to me. It was kind of coming out of React Conf. And I feel like in some ways Redwood has tried to be that. Like if you go to Laravel's homepage and look at their feature set, Redwood actually offers most of that out of the box. So like we have background jobs built in. I don't know
Yeah.
of any other JavaScript framework that offers background jobs.
No,
Um,
save Redwood, like everybody else is just, hey, we'll give you like a server action maybe, but like
mhm.
and routing, but like
Yep.
that's about it. Nothing
Yep.
else on the back end.
Yep. And that's a good conversation too. Maybe we can jump over there. Yeah, because otherwise it's gonna be disjointed. But talking about like what is a framework, period.
Yeah.
But the other side of it is like we haven't really announced this, but we have storage and file system built in.
Wow.
Yeah, which is pretty cool. We just kind of wrapped all that stuff in. So we
And
snuck it in the feature, and then the developer that was working on it took a sabbatical. So then we had another developer come in and like refine and tighten all of it. I believe last week he released like some example code for 15 different use cases of how you might want to use uploads and file systems. So
yeah.
I'll find a link to that. But I'm like, I love that kind of development too, where you're like, this is my use case. Now we're going to make sure that the framework supports that use case and what that looks like.
Does it work like when you get into stuff like that, you have to think about runtimes. Does
Mhm.
it work everywhere, right? Because Cloudflare,
Yeah.
it's not going to work. Like,
Yeah.
things that don't have things that are serverless, essentially.
Yes.
It's not
So
going to have an application for.
some of
So
right. Well, and this is kind of interesting too. The A lot of the decisions that we've made lately were been like, okay, let's do this more like from a serverful environment, like
sure,
background jobs. You need a server. Other You can hack it. You can have
yeah,
another server ping like Vercel to run the jobs,
right,
but it really is better if you have complete control over the environment. You have a little bit more flexibility there. So I'd say the same is true for the stuff that we're doing with file system and storage. But you can also, the first developer kind of went deep into this path. And this is also why we had another developer on the team kind of revamp and re-explore with these use cases. You can store an image as base 64, which gives you like this huge chunk string that nobody could possibly read. And since we're GraphQL, you could just store that string inside GraphQL, like inside your database. But like then you get to situations where you're like bloating the database with these huge base 64 things.
right.
You can't really manipulate the image if you want to deliver different sizes and things like that. So that's why we came up with all those use cases. But I'm just saying, like, when you have GraphQL as your backend, like, there's some pretty interesting things that you can do with that. So, um, there was something here. I'm pulling up my slides here. So we have auth out of the box, which I don't think, unless you want to reach for like one of Kent's starter kit, like his Epic Web, you don't have auth out of the box with anything else. Um, we have testing out of the box, like you don't have to do
Hmm.
anything to configure that. We
Yep.
have form validation out of the box. So we have Mailer too, which is pretty awesome, and Redwood Studio. So Redwood Studio will let you preview your emails when you're in dev mode, or you can also run telemetry and performance stuff. So you can see like when you're working with GraphQL, do you have N+1, or why are these queries taking so long? You can see graphs for all of that stuff. So anyways, that's my pitch for Redwood and why you might go with Redwood. I think it's really great if you're trying to build an application. But here's the caveat. It is a spa right now. We're still working on that RSC, SSR piece of it. And so if it's a app hidden by a login, you don't have to have SEO. You're not going to have things unfurl. It makes sense. Like spa is great. But if you're trying to do an application that you're sharing links with people, you want things to unfurl, you're trying to be mindful of load times and performance, things like that, on each query, then it might not be the best thing.
Yeah. I'm going to answer that question that you kind of posed at the beginning of like, what is a framework? Because
Mhm.
I think that's going to reveal a lot. Like
Yep.
at a minimum, in my opinion, a framework is some kind of a view library, right?
Mhm.
React or Svelte, let's say.
I was like, no pun intended, not Vue, VUE.
Yeah, some kind of like a UI
Mhm.
library for rendering HTML. Um, some kind of a router,
Mhm.
and then some way to perform actions on the server. So to
Yep.
load data, to
Yep.
update data, and like do a
CRUD.
mutation. That's as small, I think, as a framework can be. And it didn't used to be that way. Like create React app, people were like, this is
Yep.
a almost like a React framework.
Mhm.
Hardly, right? But now that we're taking the server into consideration, frameworks now kind of have to address both sides. And what's
Yep.
interesting is that a lot of these meta frameworks, a lot of the frameworks that you're comparing, start from a different place.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so a lot of them are kind of starting from server side now.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
Next.js does, Remix does, and one that kind of is breaking the mold that your talk didn't actually capture, which now maybe we should consider it, is
Mm.
TanStack Start.
Oh.
That is actually coming from the client side.
Mhm.
So the way he built it starts at the client, which is interesting.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's what I think a framework should be, like the
Yep.
smallest bit of a framework should be.
Yep.
What I really want though is like typically you want to expand a little bit more in both directions. So on the front end, you kind of want to see like, hey, give me a mocking solution. My headset's dying. Awesome. My
Oh.
headset's dying. So you want like a mocking solution for the front end. You want uh, probably like some kind of a form library or form validation.
Mhm.
And on the
Mhm.
back end side, you just want like a ton of utilities for a serverful environment. How to
Yep.
send emails, how to do background jobs, how to handle image uploads and storing them, things like that.
Yep.
But like you start at the middle with your base set of features and then slowly work out.
Mhm.
And I think that's what we're saying is like nobody has covered the full gamut of both actually to save Redwood, who's
Yep.
gotten the closest, right?
Right, right. So there's 2 points I would add. When you talk about what is a framework, you hit everything that I covered in the talk because I did answer that question. Um, I slid, you talked about rendering data. So that's where I kind
Mhm.
of went into client or server or build or request time.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
those
yeah.
are kind of what makes
Yeah.
that. But that goes into what you're talking about, the approaches. I also would throw DX into that because why would you reach for a framework? It has to do with the experience of that and whether it allows you to move faster. And then,
Well, two things, right? It's like they made all the decisions for you.
yep,
So you didn't have to go find the libraries and stitch them all
right,
together. And two, they give you a lot of helpers on like this is how you spin up a project easy, or this is how you add a route or like a component or whatever, which probably means a CLI that does some things for you.
yes, yes, yes. And then in terms of this doesn't make up the framework, but it plays a big role when you're deciding a framework is the longevity of it. And I broke the longevity into two parts. Some of it is like, how long has it been around? And the other side of it is where's the funding coming from? Because if not, you want to know not only does it have the history, but also does it have the future? And
Well,
so,
it's like what were their opinions that they picked? Are
mhm,
they picking like bleeding edge tech that's only been out for a little bit? And are they just grabbing the new shiny stuff? Or are they really like relying on the tried and true stuff, the boring
right,
stuff almost?
right.
Um,
Yep.
and I'd throw one more pillar in there,
Okay.
like education or
Mm,
community, essentially.
yes,
Like when you're
yes.
using a framework, it needs to be super well documented and it needs to have all the questions answered.
Mhm,
That's how a framework gets popular and stays popular, is because like people are asking questions, the framework authors and maintainers are answering them, and you know that it'll handle anything you can throw at it. And when you encounter a
mhm.
problem, you can get over it.
That's right. That's a really good point. So I think before we kind of go on to the next point, I think what's interesting is because we started off talking about the Laravel piece of it. And then when you look at the JavaScript ecosystem and where other frameworks have gone, a lot of them are leaning on that composability piece. Like, I just want to be able to pick what I want. Like, just let me pick all these other pieces. And so sometimes that makes things easier and sometimes that makes things harder. And so I'm not sure exactly what the balance is there.
Yeah, I think Wes said this on Syntax recently, and I couldn't agree more. He's like, I want a framework to be opinionated, but I want it to be my opinions. um,
Yes.
and that's why for me, I'm just currently like building my own starters. I always build and improve my starters, and now I'm adding testing and Sentry and all this stuff to them where like now when I spin up an app, it's going to have all of my opinions just baked in because I chose it and I put it together. Is it wasting time? Maybe, but like I'd rather really know my stack than necessarily like jump in and completely rely on somebody else's opinions and how they did things.
Yeah. So actually, we did an episode. I think, was this the first time you were ever on the Compressed podcast?
I don't know.
We did an episode with Brad. I'm gonna find the number, all about his productivity setup.
Oh yeah.
And it talks, so if you're like listening to Brad talk about his starter kits and like, oh, that's interesting, how does all of that work, check out this episode. It's episode 68. It is actually one of our most popular episodes. So
68 feels like it was a long time ago.
It was April of 2022.
Wow.
Which does feel like a long time ago, but in my mind, this episode is evergreen. All the things that you talk about still apply. They're still helpful.
Still doing it. Yeah.
Yep. Where do you want to go?
Well, okay, let's start breaking them down individually. We'll talk
Okay.
about like, well, I guess the commonalities. So we talked about what makes a framework. So which ones of these have what we just talked about? The data fetching, the routing, the backend support, things like that.
They all have some degree of that, in some capacity. I think the biggest thing is like what you bring in for the back end. So in my project, kind of what I based this content on was I built the same app on every single framework. I was trying to compare code for what it looks like in each scenario.
And did you have to build like a separate backend application to serve data like some other Express or Hono app to do the data piece?
Yeah.
Or
So
were you relying explicitly on these frameworks to handle all of that?
yeah, so I used Prisma in every single application and connected it to a Postgres database.
Uh-huh.
And with the exception of Redwood, I used Supabase's auth
Okay.
to handle
And then
all of
so your
that.
API layer was whatever the framework provided, not another node server that you brought up.
That's right, except for Redwood, which right now has GraphQL support. So it's still using Prisma to set everything up, but then I'm using GraphQL to serve up the endpoints, to serve as the API layer.
Yep.
It's a little bit different there. The similarities, I would say, across, with the exception of Redwood, all the other ones for their router is a file or a folder based system. And so there might be differences in how you name things. So for example, you might use square brackets for like a dynamic route where you have an ID, or you might use a $sign for the ID. But for the most part, it just depends on, like, if you just drop a folder and a file in here, then all of a sudden you have your URL.
Did any of the frameworks have a configuration or like a file config file based router?
Right. So Redwood does, and that's probably one of my favorite features about it. I just feel like it's easier to maintain that way and easier to update. Remix does, but I've never used it. Have you used it?
I have, and they're coming out with a new version. So I think the
Okay.
new version is going to be a whole lot better from what I've seen, which
Awesome.
includes, instead of all the funky characters to
Yeah.
do the layout and not do the layout and do the URL and not do the URL,
Mhm.
they're all nested functions. And so it
Oh,
becomes, I think
interesting.
this is how they're getting some of the type safe stuff too.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when I've looked at the documentation for remixes, I should just build an app on it. Cause I mean, that's really how I learn best. That's how I develop an opinion, is I just build something on it. That's why I did this project. But the remix, based on the documentation, it felt like I was more limited than what I got with the files and folder names.
Gotcha.
Maybe that's true, maybe that's not. But again, that's just from reading the documentation.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about like which ones skew more server and which ones skew more client.
Good question. So Svelte is going to render everything on the server and on the client. It'll make the decision for you unless you explicitly say within the file name, like about.server.ts.
Okay,
Or
and it'll make the decision based on which one of its like data fetching methods you're going to call in the in the script
Or
tag
is
or
it like
something.
trying to update like that?
Right. Because
So like it
it
might give you the first render up from the server, but the second
right,
render from the client.
right. And it knows because it had compiled this already,
Right.
because it's a compiled framework. And so it knows, okay, this has to run here, this has to run here. So the output bundle is like, this is what you host, and this is your JavaScript bundle.
That's right. And then Astro, you have fences. So if you've ever worked with Markdown, you have like these 3 dashes at the top where you put all your front matter in it.
Yep.
Astro has something like when you look at it, you're like, oh, this looks like front matter. But within those 3 dashes and 3 dashes at the bottom, you can have all the code that you want to run on the server. So I found, at least when you're working with it, it's really nice separation to be like, I know this is running on the server. So,
Yeah, it's not like all just JavaScript where you're like, which one is which again?
and you
Yeah.
don't have like these weird configurations with Next where you're like, use server, use client. You just know this is running on the server.
Okay, let's that's a good stopping point to talk about the next paradigm, right? Because everybody else has, like, Remix has these functions run on the server. You know that it's a convention; they always run on the server. And then Astro is like, this stuff is your script tag; it runs on the server. All that kind of stuff. Next, did you find that, after trying all these frameworks, Next felt confusing because of the directives, the use server, the use client? Do you not know where things are running?
I felt for the most part it's pretty straightforward-ish.
I
There
guess
is a
app router I'm
little
talking
bit
about.
of a mental shift though, where I ran into issues, and I think you pointed this out, is like you have to, this threw me off in the very first Next app project that I worked on. It wants maybe you can help me with I might use the word wrong. It's a object primitive. Is that the right word?
Object primitive?
I think so. So what I was doing was I was just like passing props. I grabbed all the data and passed it down, and I just passed in my props. But because I was going from like the server to a client component, it's like, whoa. We need an object primitive. And it's because it's not serialized. Is this ringing bells? And I was like, I'm passing an object. What's wrong? But it needs like a 1-layer object so that everything can be serialized. You can't have like these nested things.
Yeah. Yeah, and supposedly, like, Remix is coming out with this single fetch thing, which can serialize anything, which I still don't understand that.
Yeah.
That's
So
the
let me
black magic.
explain that, because I am kind of talking very vaguely right now. But say like you have a person, and on your person object, you have address. And so then as an address, you have another object. And that object has the street, the city, the state, the zip. Sorry, this is the United States. But that's how or at least how we structure our addresses. So what I'm talking about is because it can't really serialize it because that address object is nested. It wants everything in that initial layer. And so one thing that you can do is you can like serialize it. Like it's just say like, here's a JSON string, pass it over, and I'm going to convert it back. But it's
Yeah, so you're saying like it won't automatically serialize it for you if
well,
it's
here's the
nested?
thing. I don't know if it will now or not, because that was an early version of
Gotcha.
Next. So take all that with a grain of salt. But anyways, it was just, that was kind of like, oh, that's different.
Okay.
That's a decision, not a decision, but a limitation.
Yeah. Any other big, like, as you were switching between frameworks, any other big gotchas? You're like, man, why did they do it this way? Or this doesn't jive with me. Like things that made you stumble.
Okay, so this isn't stumbling, but I think it's important to talk about is Remix has the data loader pattern, which is really interesting. I like this. So within every page, you can have 3 functions. You can have your loader function, your actions function, and then your actual page component that is a function. And does all the rendering. But when the page loads, it's going to run the loader function. When I'm processing an action, or when I'm processing a form, it's going to run the action function. And then you have your rendering piece. I like that separation. It's nice to be like, I know I'm loading my data. I know that I'm handling my form. And you just know when you open up a page, you have those functions and that capability available.
Yeah, the downside there is that like the action is a little overloaded. On some pages, you have multiple ways to like mutate data, and so you kind of have to like either pass in a hidden input to tell your action function what you're doing, or just make separate action routes and route to a different page, which
That's right.
now there's more complexity in how you handle errors and things like that,
Mhm.
because standard browser behavior is that it would return right back to the original page, and you don't get some of that stuff for free anymore.
Right. Right. Well, and what's interesting, so if you look at GraphQL, I mean, Redwood on the other side, because it's using GraphQL, you can do all that stuff on the page. Like I can just, throw it, hey, update the page, wherever, willy-nilly.
Wherever, yeah.
It's amazing. But the problem is, so I know people have mixed feelings about GraphQL. That's fine. I particularly like it just because I'm like, hey, this is the data I need. Thank you very much. You gave me exactly what I was looking for. But the best way to interact with GraphQL, I think, is with Apollo. And with Apollo comes a lot of boilerplate code. So if I'm going to create a mutation, this is almost embarrassing to describe. You have a GraphQL call that handles the mutation. Then you have to define you have to use the use mutation function that that Apollo gives you that calls that GraphQL mutation. It gives you a function back, and then you actually have to call that function within your handle submit. So there's like 3 chunks of code that you have to remember for every single form submission.
I
So
mean, 4 if you want to include the revalidation, right? So after you do the mutation, you typically need to revalidate some data,
yeah. Well, you can
and they give you a revalidate function.
right. So with that stuff, a lot of times you can handle that within the use Apollo or use mutation hook, because there's an options object that you can pass it like on completed, on error, like and you can have it refetch everything.
Gotcha.
So you just say like, hey, once if this was done, refetch or refresh this cached query to get the latest data back from the database. So if it updated, give me this, give me that. But it's just like, oh man, you have the GraphQL, the use mutation, the function, and then
Yeah.
it's just a lot of code. So if something goes wrong, trying to figure out where that went wrong is sometimes fun.
Talk about, like, did you notice any performance differences between the 3 apps? Did you
Yeah,
actually deploy
I
them, or did you just run them local? Or
they are deployed.
okay,
The everything's basically running on Vercel. I mean, you just
mhm.
can't get over how easy it is with
It's
Vercel.
really easy. Yeah,
I'm like, think what you want about Vercel, but I just don't think that experience has been matched anywhere. Well, I mean, Netlify's come close.
yeah, and I
Um,
gotta say, like, I've tried deploying remix apps on Cloudflare, and Cloudflare can run them just fine. But the problem is
mhm,
when you want to use like environment variables,
mhm,
the way Cloudflare delivers the variables into your JavaScript is weird. They're not globally available. They're like coming in as context to the request, which makes it difficult to share around your app.
mhm.
Um, very problematic. Vercel's like, yo,
Interesting.
we'll inject the environment variables for you. It's like, fine,
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is just even this is so simple and so small, but even their user experience around adding environmental variables to your app.
Oh, it's so good. You can use the CLI to upload local environment
I
variables.
haven't
You can
done
use
that
the
yet.
CLI to pull them down. You can copy and paste an entire env file, and it just blops in.
Yes,
Like,
that's what I
it's
usually
so
do.
good.
I just copy my env file, and then I
Yes.
go to the web environment, and I just hit paste, and it knows. It just enters everything in.
I also find that the way they can separate them in like in a production environment, in preview environments,
Mhm.
like or
Yep.
you can define an environment. It's great.
Yeah. So, it's all done on Vercel is the
So now that they're deployed, right? Did you notice any of them running any faster, any slower
yeah, so
than
I'm
each
still
other?
working on this, part. So this hopefully I'll have this information for the Atlanta conversation, but I am working with Sentry. So huge shout
Ooh,
out to
cool.
Sentry. They have performance tools built in, and a huge part of this project was like, I don't want this to be just a Redwood commercial that, "Oh yeah, of course she said Redwood, she
Sure.
works there." But to be the objective person in the room to say, "Actually, XY framework is the best," or, this is running smoother here, or, whatever. Sentry has
Yeah,
so many great tools.
it's hard. I guess I want to talk about performance and about Sentry. it's hard because when you're measuring performance of these different apps, if one is server rendered, its time to first byte is going to be slower,
Mm-hmm.
right? But if
Mhm.
one is more like leaning on the client side, it's going to have a way faster time to first byte. But like it's going to be done painting probably, if all else was equal, after the server rendered apps, right? Because it's got to
Mhm.
make more than one round trip to the network. One for the shell,
Yep.
then hydrate the React, and then call and go get your data. So
Yep.
like performance is different. It all kind of depends, and it goes into like what kind of app are you building and what
Right.
kind of experience do you need.
Right.
And then second, with these more complex apps, the ones that do the hydrate, like there's the server piece and the client piece, and you're
Mhm.
calling server actions and stuff. The Sentry setup is actually more complicated now than it ever was. It was back in the day, you'd like wrap an entire React client side app in Sentry. That was the only concern you ever had. But now you have to like make sure you're wrapping the server render portion and
Mm.
the client portion
Mhm.
and any client side transitions, because your loaders and actions are called again. So like the Sentry setup, I noticed has gotten more difficult as these frameworks get more complex.
Yeah. And some of that'll be interesting too as we move kind of pendulum swings the other way and we go to more of a serverful environment, what things are easier and what things are harder because spas solved a very specific problem, but they also created other problems that we're
Yeah.
now trying to solve for.
But I don't think we'll ever go back. Like, I don't think the pendulum will ever swing all the way the other way. Like, we know the benefits of client side transitions.
Mhm. Mhm.
They're just super fast. Um, and if you can do some nice preloading, then it's going to feel really snappy, and you can get the best of
Yep.
both worlds. All your secrets and a lot of your data stuff stays on the server. You hand that over to the client. It hydrates, and now like your app just goes quickly. I don't
Yeah.
think we'll ever go all the way back.
One thing I will say that I appreciate about Remix is how they have stuff built in for handling optimistic UI. So it's like I'm just gonna assume that it works and then we'll deal with it if it doesn't.
Yeah. And that's coming to React anyways here soon. Like I feel like the remix surface area is actually going to get way smaller with like React adopting like the use action status or whatever the heck it
Mhm.
is. It's like what's
Mhm.
happening with your mutation and the optimistic UI stuff.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
remix is just going to get smaller and smaller, which is kind of cool. Um, and a lot of the frameworks that bank on React are just going to get better because of it.
Yeah. I was trying to think what other pieces. Oh, let's talk about one other thing. Middleware.
Oh, yeah.
So when you're talking about you mentioned routing with Remix and how sometimes those loader and action functions can get quite large because you're having to run a lot of the same code in each. Now you can put those in an extra or an external function to call it, but other frameworks like Astro and Next and eventually Redwood have a middleware layer where you can just run those functions inside middleware and then you don't even have to run them on the page. It just knows, oh, you're going to that route. Let's authenticate.
Yeah. How do you do like what's the process for defining middleware on each route? Because what you don't want to do is say, hey, don't forget to add the auth middleware every time you create a new
Mhm.
route. Like, how do you
Yeah.
guarantee that like this isn't a problem of forgetting to add the middleware that
Yeah.
you need everywhere?
Yeah. So, like I said, it's coming to the server version of Redwood.
Hmm.
But when you're talking about authentication in Redwood right now, because there's a configuration file, you can just wrap it and it looks like
Okay.
the route file looks like a React component, but you can wrap it in a set component and you can
Gotcha.
have a private set. So there's like if you have an authenticated route, just stick it inside, like when you define it, stick it in that block of code. So that makes
Gotcha.
it
Okay.
super easy. With Astro, it's kind of interesting because you have a file and it's the easiest way to handle it, which can be maybe a little clunky, is to say, like, I'm just going to have a folder called admin, and any file inside my admin folder is going to be protected. And so then in middleware, it's just looking for that admin inside your route.
Is it like glob based? Like, hey, these paths are
You can
fall
make
under this middleware?
You can basically make it that way. So I
Okay.
can say, I'm gonna if it's an admin route, then apply authentication.
Mm.
You could define it on the page on a per page basis. You could like not use the middleware, but then you're having to put that function
Right.
everywhere.
Right.
You could also look for it on a per route basis, but then to your point, you are having to remember, okay, if this is a protected route, I need to add a block of code
Yep.
every single time. So anyways, that's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But I mean, thinking about Laravel, what they do is they have a within their routes file, you say with authentication, which is kind of like how Express handles it. If you think about
Yeah.
their syntax is with their middlewares, you just say with whatever you want that middleware layer to be.
Which one do you think you got up and running the fastest, and which one do you think you got up and running the slowest?
Well, that's not a fair question. And the reason why I live in Redwood, so I can like move around it super fast. I know things, just the documentation. I think Redwood covers so much ground that I think if I didn't live and breathe it every day, it wouldn't move as like I wouldn't be able to move around as fast. So I don't think that that's a fair thing. I also depending on what I'm building, I love Astro. I really do.
Yeah.
I love that it has markdown support built in.
Yeah.
So, a lot of if I'm doing like a marketing site, that's what I'm going to reach for is Astro. So like this is alluding to my pick and plug later, but I have a freakingfullstack.com. That's an Astro site. So I just love that I can say, oh, here's a bunch of markdown files, and then it'll handle that content as collections or its own page. It's really nice. And then I really do like Remix. There's a few areas that are harder for me to work with, but some of it's just, I wonder, that's a question that I ask myself. Is this harder because I don't work with it every day, or it's a pattern that I'm, not used to? And if I just got more comfortable with it, I would like it more.
Yeah.
I think that's valid.
Maybe now's a good time to talk about like which frameworks stood out for different use cases.
Okay.
You
So
already made the case for Astro and kind of
Yep.
like documentation or marketing sites, anything
Yep.
that consumes Markdown for sure.
Right. Remix, I love for a small app.
Mhm.
To me, it is great. You get a lot of stuff out of the box. The one thing that I really appreciate about Remix is they have said the browser is super powerful. Browser API is great. Why not lean into it?
Yeah.
So, for a small site, it's great. I've had problems when it's gotten to be a large application, and then it just becomes harder for me to manage all the pieces. And some of that I think really does come down to how it handles routes. And I'm really interested to see how it handles this next iteration with the configuration piece. It's also going to be interesting to see how that really overlays with the React Router 7
Yep.
and how all that works together. I'm interested.
Yep. They're getting closer to like converging them, or like getting Remix and just being like
Mhm.
telling them just use the React Router 7 Veep plugin
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah. Svelte is a question mark right now. So they had their Svelte summit last Saturday or the Saturday before, and they've officially released version 5.
Mhm.
And so I need to spend more time with that setup. I really like the old version of Svelte because it felt more JavaScripty. So for example, if you had state, there's no need to have this use state hook that then sticks, gives you a array. Then the first value is the name of state, and the second is a function to update it. Like, try explaining that to a new person. That's
Yeah.
very strange and very awkward. With Svelte, you just say like let count, and you're just defining your variable. And because you put let in front of it, you can update it. And if it
I've
needs
heard
to be,
runes
yeah,
like change that a little bit, and it's like
that's
not
right.
as easy anymore.
That's right. So, and before, so if it needed to be a prop, you just say export. Now it's available. Like you can pass in a
Mhm.
value. With ruins, it looks more like React boilerplate code. So you have dollar signs in there and you're wrapping things in functions. I've seen people like Scott Talinsky talk about how like, oh, wasn't crazy about this, but now that I'm using it, it's great and it makes sense. I'm just not sure what that level is. So right now, all of the old stuff is still supported in Svelte 5, but moving forward, I think they're going to deprecate it. So,
Yeah.
there is a video, and I will share it. It is on my watch list, where It's on the Syntax YouTube channel where Scott created a mini course. It's about an hour and a half. Hopefully you didn't hear that, and that was just in my ears.
I did hear something.
You did? That's
And my
funny.
camera's been flashing this whole time, so who knows what's going on. I'm running on my brand new MacBook, so
Ooh,
still working the
fancy.
kinks out.
Okay, hold on. YouTube. I need to mute this site as part of the problem. I don't see that. Okay. I'll find the link really quick. But there we go. Okay. There we go. So Scott Talinsky just released about an hour and a half Svelte basic course explaining all the stuff. So it's in my watch list. I'm going to go through it and just try and get a better grasp on all the new features of Svelte.
Cool.
But I think it goes back to what you're talking about with the documentation. So Svelte's documentation is completely different than any of the other frameworks. If you go to their
Yes.
site, it's like, I'll give you some information, but mostly I'm just going to give you a playground to see how this works and to experiment. Sometimes I like that. And then sometimes I'm like, oh, just tell me what I need to know.
And I gotta say, for as much as I love Remix, I don't love their documentation.
Oh,
They're a
yeah.
little too focused on like API level documentation.
Mhm.
And I'm just like, can you tell me how to use this? Like,
Yeah.
instead of just what it is?
Yeah, the other thing that gets me sometimes about Remix's documentation is because for a while they were adding support, like they were doing something in React Router and then they'd add it to Remix. They do something in
Yeah.
Remix and then add it to React Router. So you go to pages within the Remix documentation where it's like, this is the same thing as React Router. Just go check
Just
out
go
their
over there. Yeah.
I was like, no, I'm right here. Tell me now.
Yeah. And I'm ready for them to kind of like really get that story straight where it's like,
Mhm.
we finally made the clean break. Use React Router, and here's what Remix actually does for you.
Yeah, for sure. What else?
At the end of the day, doing all this, do you think it changed your mind on the tools you would use for anything? Do you have a new
Mm.
default? Like what did this show you? What'd you
Oh,
learn
that's a good
now that it's all
question.
done?
That's a good question. So, I'm such a framework nerd. I just like experimenting with all these things that in some ways it's made it harder. So I build a new app and I go through my head and I'm like, oh, should do this in Astro because I want to put the documentation here and I can format like, but wait, Remix also offers Markdown support. So I could format it like this, but it's a larger app. I really don't want to, I love to use Storybook. And that's already built into Redwood automatically. So I have like these circular conversations in my head. So I would say, for somebody that's like, oh, what do I do? What do I learn? Where do I start? Now, I almost appreciate your approach, Brad, where you're like, I'm your Remix guy. Remix is my thing.
I had way too many of those circular conversations in my head. And I just decided one day that I'm going to pick, what is it, like the tool of least power, essentially. That's Tailwind for CSS for me. That's Remix for a JavaScript framework, and just go. Because if I keep don't get me wrong, like I want to check out like just Hono for building APIs. I want to check out this new One framework. I really want to check out Tan Stack Start. And I'm like, I'll never build anything if I continue to do this. So I kind of drew a line in the sand and said, I'm going to shore up my starter templates. I'm going to make more advanced starter templates, which include auth, DB, all this stuff. And then I'm just going to like stamp out new applications when I have ideas and don't even think about the tech stack. Just get good at using a tool. Because if you look at all these indie hacker guys, if you look at Kitse, if you look at Mark Liu or any of these guys who are popular, like we use the same tech every time and it allows us to move fast. So that's where I want to get to personally.
Yeah. Or Peter Levels is like PHP. I do everything old school. And I mean, I can't tell you how many people that we've interviewed on the podcast that we've asked, oh, what's your tech stack? Because we love those conversations.
Yeah.
Like pick boring tech. Pick
Yeah.
boring tech. It's stable. People know it. You don't want your tech to be where you're making all your decisions. And it's actually really interesting. I heard a new concept the other day called innovation points. Have you heard this before? So a person, I think all this is confidential, so I'll just leave it super vague.
Okay.
A person that I know is starting a new company And the question was, what is my tech stack? And so apparently when you're starting a new company, you have, I haven't dug into it, so I don't know if it's just this person's theory or if it's like widespread. But this person believes in innovation points. And so what that means is when you have a startup, you have so many innovation points to spend. The way that at least I understand it, is you have certain areas where you want to innovate and certain areas where you're like, I'm just like, that's where my focus is going to be in terms of
Right.
pushing things forward.
Right.
And so, anyways, he ended up going with a different tech stack than what you might expect because it was old and boring. And it's like, we don't want this to be where we spend our innovation points. We want just to pick something stable that everybody knows, and we'll spend our innovation points focusing on other things to push the company forward.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Like focus on your business value, like the thing that you're actually going to do that differentiates you.
Your business logic.
Yeah.
So that's the other problem. How many apps have I started where I started in one app and then I hit the hard part and I'm like, well, I'll just go rebuild this and remix. And then I hit the hard part and then I'm like, well, let's see how this looks in Astro. And so I've built the same app multiple times, which is just dumb. It's like I hit the hard spot and then I wanted, instead of pushing through it and solving it,
Right.
go on to something else. So, I would just advise people, pick one. I don't think you can really go wrong. They all basically give you the same thing, and build. Like that's more important, is the building piece.
I think my take for something like this is like, I've tried them all, and just go with the one that vibes the most with you. If
Mhm.
you feel like using one feels like a struggle and it's not fitting your mental model and you're like constantly just being like, wait, what? I don't get this.
Mhm.
Go with the one that you get, that you understand what it's doing, that just clicks with the way you view what a framework should do. And then
Mhm.
I think you're going to be set up for much more success in the long term, rather than worrying about the slight differences between these frameworks, which don't really have an impact on the app that you're building,
Yeah.
just the experience you have while building it. So just optimize for like the best experience while building it so that you keep going.
Yep. Yep, for sure. Cool. Do you want to do picks and plugs?
Yeah, I got something.
Okay. First, though, I didn't do this at the top of the show. So we'll do a little fancy editing when this goes live, audio version. But I did want to highlight our sponsor. So our sponsor today is Wix Studio. And one thing that I really appreciate about Wix is I've just traditionally thought of that as a no code or a low code tool for building websites. But Wix has put a huge emphasis on developers and empowering developers. And the cool part is, we all know we're not just building websites for ourselves and having to be concerned about our own tech stack, but also the people that were building it, the marketers, the salespeople. And one of the things that Wix does is it allows you to use code with low code. And so when you talk about, yeah, we have all these JavaScript frameworks, Wix Studio has a lot of these features that we're talking about, like, oh, we have to start from the beginning. It already gives you a lot of those tools to enable your teams to build things more efficiently. So check out Wix Studio. We are going to have, I believe, one of their founders on in a few weeks, so we can ask them more questions, get more details about Wix Studio, and just a lot of the mental models that go around their development processes and workflows.
Yeah, with Wix Studio, you can avoid this entire JavaScript framework conversation.
Right. Which, literally more power to you.
Yeah, yeah.
You're focusing on different problems, more business problems. Don't waste your innovation points. So the next segment of the show is our picks and plugs section, where we pick something that we like, could be anything, and then we plug something generally that we've worked on. So, Brad, what do you have for picks and plugs?
Another video game.
Do you?
It's what I've been doing
Yeah.
to just relax lately. And there's a new Zelda that came out, a 2D
It
Zelda,
was released.
Echoes of
It's
Wisdom.
Oh,
It's
no.
2D.
Oh,
Yeah.
no. I'm gonna have to get that one.
It's good. You actually play as Zelda, not as
Okay.
Link. And the
Okay.
whole shtick of the game is like everything you come across in the world, you can like clone it and use it. So anytime you want to
Oh.
like summon a table, a chair, an enemy, you can just summon it and it can like fight for you, or you use it to like,
Oh,
traverse and
interesting.
jump on it. Very puzzle heavy, like everything's a puzzle,
Oh,
just like
fun.
Zelda games, but
Ah,
even more
yeah,
so because you're like using your library of things to try to accomplish a goal.
okay. You had me at 2D
It's
just
good. Yeah.
because I get lost in 3D worlds. So even if it's like, I don't know if I'm assuming it's like this, where there's a specific game style where it's like you're looking at the overall board. So even like you're kind of moving around, maybe in 3D space, it's not like Mario where you're just moving left to right. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's exactly like Link's Awakening, the
Yeah.
2D isometric. Yeah.
Yeah. The isometric. That's what I was trying to think of.
Yeah.
I don't get lost in those worlds. It's the 3D stuff. There's just something disorienting to me. So I love that
Yeah.
it's 2D.
Well, and all the Zelda 3D worlds lately have been too big. Too big.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then what about a plug?
Plug, my Twitter has been doing pretty well lately. I got a ton of followers after tweeting that I joined Stripe. Apparently, all I
Yay.
have to do is mention Stripe, and boom, you get a bunch of followers. So
That's awesome.
thanks, Stripe. So go check me
Yeah.
out. x.com/Brad Garrity.
Oh man. I have been MIA on Twitter, so
I feel like I post more pictures there than anything else. Like I treat it like a photo reel where I'm like, oh, I did something cool that's somewhat related to
Yeah.
tech. Here's a photo of it.
Yeah. I have been thinking more about this sounds so old. I miss the old Instagram where it's like I'm just posting photos.
Me
I like it on
too.
Instagram now and it's just all videos. I'm like, I don't want to watch a video. I just want to see a photo.
You know what
See.
kills me on Instagram where people are like, you see like a post that you want to go check out and you click on it and they're like, all the information's down in the caption. And I'm like, I'm not here for that. Just tell me what I need to know right in the post.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyways, okay. So I'm going to plug, I don't even know what this is an AirPod cleaner. I was like, I don't even know what the official brand is.
I need
So
one of
I've
those.
had an issue lately. I'm not going to open this. I think it'll be okay. Maybe not. I'm not going to risk it.
Yeah,
I have my
it'll
AirPods in right
connect, yeah.
now. I have my AirPods in right now, so I'm not going to open it. But I was having issues where they weren't necessarily charging. So I bought this little cleaner. It was like maybe $5-7 on Amazon. Pretty cool. So on one end, this slides out. This is like a giant Q-tip, but you can stick this down and clean the little stem part inside your AirPods. And then on the other side, so this little slider goes one way, it's the Q-tip. The other way is this little, it has a protector thing on the tip.
Yeah,
so this
for
is a
the
little pointy thing. And so you can like clean anything out. You can pull the little rubbery stuff out, get those all nice and clean. There's a little brush here that you can use on like the sensors for noise canceling. And then I guess it's like the speakers and things like that. So it was embarrassing how dirty they were. And it solved my connectivity problems,
nice
charging problems. So
yeah, AirPods
anyways.
are amazing. Probably, I mean, I switched over to the whole Apple ecosystem not that long ago. Or I returned to the Apple ecosystem, I should say. And AirPods are probably my favorite bit about the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I've thought about the Air Max. This is really vain. I just don't want it to mess up my hair, and they're big. And
They're
so
really big and really heavy.
I love how compact these are. And these are getting older. So the fact that I'm cleaning them will hopefully give a
Are
little
those
bit
the
more
Gen 2s? The Pro Gen 2s? They've got noise canceling, so they must be.
Okay. Well, they are pros. Here's my hesitation. So my first set, you know how they had this huge recall where you could send them back in. I qualified for that. Yeah.
Oh.
So they like the noise canceling got bad, and there was like this weird I don't know. They would even make this weird whistling sound.
Oh.
When I was using them. And so I took them to Apple. Apple was fantastic. They ran a test on it and they were like, yeah, both of your AirPods qualify. They're both bugging out. I kept the case and they're like, we're just going to give you new pods. So they gave me the new pods. So I'm not sure. They were like newer, even though they were older version.
So the last time I was on a plane, I took both these and the AirPods. And I did side-by-side noise canceling tests on the plane.
Oh,
I think the AirPods are better.
What?
I do. There's something about how they're right in your ear. The seal is a little bit better. And I'm just like, and they're just like 1,000 times more convenient, you know? And so these headphones, the only thing I really use them for now is direct line monitoring when I'm talking into a mic so I can hear myself. Save that. AirPods are like my go-to for everything else.
Interesting. Well, that's good to know. For my plug, I'm going to plug freakingfullstack.com.
Yeah.
So check this out. It's Halloween themed, which is really fun. I mentioned earlier it is an Astro site, but I am doing a free, no strings attached, free workshop on Halloween. It's gonna be like 9 to 12 Central Standard Time. So if you're trying to do time travel, that's the same as Chicago. But we will be building a full stack application. So I did a workshop at React Summit. It was in New York, but I was remote last year. And so it's basically that same workshop, all the same content. So we'll be building this app that we talked about during the show that I built like 6 different ways. You won't have the exact app, but I'll give you all the pieces you need to be able to build it. So we'll talk through all the logic. We'll build an API layer. We'll do all the data fetching, all the things. So register. There is a
Redwood?
recording. It is Redwood.
Redwood. Okay.
Yeah.
I think I might
and
do
there
this
is
with
a
you.
recording. Oh yeah, come on. There's a
Yeah.
recording. So if you're like, I'm at work, you will get the email with the recording later, and you can listen to it at 2x.
Nice. Next Thursday. I'm wide open. Let's do this.
Perfect. Awesome. So thanks everybody for hanging out or lurking. We always enjoy at least the little number count that shows us how many people are listening. Makes me feel a little bit better, like I'm not just talking into the void. But for now, that's all we got.
See ya.
So that's goodbye number 1. We're no longer recording. But yeah, seriously though, thank you everybody for hanging out. And I know we've been a little bit MIA lately, but we're going to try and be more regular coming up. We have, as I mentioned, an interview with one of the guys from Wix Studio. We also have Michael Chan joining us in the future, talking about developer productivity, which should be super fun. So, and then I need to reschedule. We have Dustin Goodman coming on. He was at Dot Labs, and now he is a engineer at. Do you remember?
I don't.
Let me see. I can find it really quick. Where is he at? Oh, the suspense. Okay, this is dumb. If you are in
Click up.
X, yes, there you go. There you go. I was like, if you're in X and you're looking at a DM, you can't just click on the name and it goes to their profile. So, sweet. We also have Lawrence Codes coming on. So he is in Memphis. Okay, so if this is interesting. I'm just rambling right now. I'll say this and I'll let everybody go. I did Jason Lingstorf's Web Day Challenge, which was super fun. You should check it out on YouTube. Lawrence was another competitor. It wasn't really competition.
Yeah.
But he did Java on the front end, which just blew everybody's
Yeah,
mind.
that's wild.
So he'll be on talking about that. So anyways, we have some good content coming up and hope you guys will join us. Bye.
See y'all.